With the RSI Polaris recently hitting the persistent universe, many Star Citizen players have been experimenting with huge torpedoes, point defense turrets, and multi-crew gameplay to much fanfare. But for those industrial-minded players, one of the more interesting features of the ship is the ability to comfortably store a Vulture in the hangar bay, along with generous cargo stores, which makes the Polaris an interesting mobile salvage base. I'm Forrester, and this gameplay video couples the Vulture and Polaris to go panel hunting in style. To keep the overall length of the video down, some of the footage, such as quantum hops, has been sped up, and those parts are clearly marked as such, but otherwise this video is a full session end to end. And this is intended to be a gameplay video rather than a guide, although there is a salvage tutorial available on the channel if that's what you were hoping for. So, without further ado, let's get started. And we'll start by spawning in the Vulture and making the long walk across the extra large hangar. This extra large hangar going to be particularly important to be able to load up the Vulture onto the Polaris. That's because the hangars, of course, really struggle with anything other than spawning in one vehicle right now. So what we need to do is hop aboard the Vulture, move it across to the side so that's out the way, and that way we can spawn in the Polaris and do some hangar juggling to get the ships all loaded up. That's a little bit awkward, it's not ideal, but it doesn't take too long. You can do it all from the safety of your hangar. And ultimately, once the Vulture is aboard the Polaris, that's it, you're ready to go, so you only really need to do it the once. Nice view there of the icebreaker Vulture. You can probably tell here I don't fly in third person view very much, struggling slightly with which way to point the controls of the ship, but there's a nice little cubby hole here underneath a sign that says Air Review Hangars, which will do nicely for slipping the Vulture in and being off the main hangar. That seems good enough. So then it's a case of hopping out, heading back to the terminal and spawning in the Polaris. And then bringing the ramp down on the Polaris, heading up to the hangar bay and opening the hangar bay doors. Love watching those doors open. Very cool little view. So it's worth adding, I'm getting a few little errors here, things like, reckless vehicle, impounded, things like that. I recorded this video during the Intergalactic Aerospace Expo at a time when the Polaris had just been widely released, and of course that meant that the servers were struggling just a little bit. So there are some glitches, issues, but it's not game breaking, so I'm carrying on anyway. Keep calm and carry on, as they say. I know it would have been very easy to show a nice smooth landing animation here, heavily edited, but I thought actually better show you the trials and tribulations of trying to get this thing to work properly when the servers aren't working properly. So this is the real Star Citizen, but don't worry, we get there in the end. A little bit of persistence, a little bit of moving things around, it all comes good. So as you can see, to get the Vulture into the Polaris, it is a tight fit. It's not a comfortable way to fly, but actually it's doable. And you know what they say, if it fits, it sits. So with the Vulture sat happily in the hangar bay, the next job is to hop into the pilot's chair, ask to open the hangar doors, and leave the hangar. Now I made a bit of an artistic choice not to speed this footage up, because I think there's something quite epic when you've got a large lumbering warship and you're doing some of the kind of finer control maneuvers like entering or leaving the hangar bay. I think it looks pretty special, and of course Microtech is a fantastic place to be doing such things. So I've included it at ×1 speed because it just feels, I don't know, it feels majestic. You can let me know in the comments if you disagree, but there's always something about when you've got a big heavy ship and you're doing your best to fly it kind of properly with the first person view, and I don't know, might just be me. So here's a little external view of the I was going to say the prospector, the Polaris and the Vulture doing what they do best, loaded up, ready to go out on our mission. I gotta say, that Polaris looks absolutely fantastic. I can see why people have got excited for this ship. So I mentioned that the servers are struggling. That also applies to quantum travel. So if you're wondering why I've not made the jump to Port Tressler for a little while there, it's because the servers are really, really doing their best to keep up. But I got into Quantum Drive, headed across to Stanton, and if you've seen my other salvage videos where I go out to the Iron Halo between 20 and 21 gigameters, that's the sweet spot. So usually get to between 20 and 21, then jump out of Quantum, and usually you'll find the asteroids. And that's what we're doing today. We've taken the Vulture, taken the Polaris, and gone out to do some panel hunting. Ultimately, the Reclaimer makes a better salvage ship for kind of the big things, but the Vulture does go quite well, I think, with the panel hunting, just because the panels tend to be across a few different areas, so it's easier to be moving around with the small Vulture, especially if you're solo, than the big old lumbering Reclaimer. But when you couple the Vulture with the cargo stores available on the Polaris, actually you've got something that can stay out here in the Iron Halo for very long periods of time, which is why I was excited to do this little test. The start of all of these sessions is the same: looking for panels. So scanning away and just looking for something with a signature that divides by 2000. So when something is in range, that signature appearing just above the center of the heads-up display, looking for something that is divisible by 2000 to denote panels. As is often the way, it doesn't quite work straight away, so it takes a little bit of time. But the advantage of the Polaris doing this scanning is it makes a beautiful, almost musical noise. Forgive the scan pings, but have a listen to this. And that's just the background noise of the ship itself. It's almost musical, so I was having a nice time looking for panels with the Polaris. But there we have it, 18,000 signature. That sounds like a panel set to me, and a decent panel set at that. So starting to adjust course, head towards that, and bring the Polaris into range. 24,000, it's a big group of panels, fantastic. So this time around I don't need to fly right up to them, because ultimately it's going to be the Vulture that's doing its thing, and because the Polaris has such a large radar signature, it's not very easy to lose it. So I'm about 5 kilometers away from the panels, going to hop into the Vulture, take it out to do its thing. Those hangar doors open. And there we are, getting it out of the hangar carefully. Wonderful. And that looks pretty special, seeing that empty hangar bay. Very well lit. So this for me is one of the exciting things when you start to get to ships this large. The versatility of the ships becomes notable. Here you've got a Polaris, which is essentially a fancy torpedo delivery system, but it's also got lots of other weapons. It's got the hangar, it's got the medical bay, it's got the cargo bay, and that means it's able to be flexed into all sorts of different roles, which for me is pretty exciting. So we're out in the Vulture, gonna salvage some panels, so do a little bit of scanning, find where the first panel is before cracking on. Here we have it, a nice big panel to start salvaging. So obviously it does prompt a few questions here as to why am I doing this? Why are you out panel hunting with a Polaris and a Vulture? Well, I think first of all it was a fun experiment to be doing this. I think the game wants to be a sandbox to some extent, and this is sandboxing. We know that when you're out panel hunting in the Vulture, it can be a good way to earn Alpha UEC, but the limiting factor is usually that cargo bay in the back, so having a large cargo bay helps. I've done a video on before on the channel where I brought a cargo ship with the Vulture, but of course that requires 2 people, and although the Polaris is very much not designed to be a solo ship, actually using it as a solo player in this way, where you don't need to use any of the combat features or any of the engineering features at the moment, it unlocks the potential of the Vulture. You've got a medical bed on board, you've got the ability to log off in a bed, you've got huge cargo stores, and so actually a Vulture plus a Polaris across multiple play sessions could stay out in the Iron Halo mining panels for a very, very long period of time, and in theory that could be a very, very efficient way of doing it. You could also argue that, well, if you've got a Polaris there, could you not just salvage the hull of the Polaris rather than this palaver of looking for panels? And I suppose there's an argument to that, but it always feels a little bit like insurance fraud doing that. And I'm an upstanding citizen. I can't be breaking UEE laws by salvaging my own ship for profits. No, that just wouldn't do. So I'm sticking on the legal side of things, and ultimately it's an experiment. It's a bit of fun. So for me, this kind of thing it shows the potential for the future. Yes, the Polaris is not really going to be a solo ship when you're out somewhere dangerous, but in the safety of the Iron Halo, when there's no reason for anything to be here to come and find you, you are very much a needle in a haystack. Plus, I suppose the Polaris has got the point defense cannons, which would buy you a little bit of time to get back to the ship and try and get out if needs be. So it was an interesting scenario to explore, and so that's what I've done. And here we are salvaging away the panels. Thank you for those of you in the video comments who've talked in previous salvage videos about using the gimbals. I have managed to get the gimbals working for me in my setup now. However, I actually find it easier moving the ship because I'm using my joystick and my pedals very lazily rather than using the mouse. I suppose there's probably an element of muscle memory in that for me because I've been doing it this way for so long. So it does work for me now using the gimbals, but I actually much prefer just fixing the salvage beams to the front of the ship and moving the ship. I can be doing that with my cup of coffee in hand, very lazily salvaging away. So in case you were wondering why I'm not using the gimbals. So there's the first panel salvaged away, and start working through the rest. if you have come here looking for guidance around salvage and things like that, this video is intended to be more gameplay. I did say it in the introduction, so this is just going to be me loosely talking over some of the things that I'm doing. But if you are looking for a full tutorial on salvage, there's one of those available on the channel. Just search the complete guide to salvage and that will give you that in a more tutorial format. But I'm sure many of you are just here to enjoy the sights and sounds of the Vulture plus the Polaris. So with the first full hopper, it's a case of starting to eject things into the cargo bay. Initially, because we've got this set of many panels, I'm just actually loading up the back of the Vulture. It still has got the cargo grid there, it's still got the space in the back. It makes sense to be just loading the stuff up on the Vulture rather than going all the way back to the Polaris now, because it's not full yet. Really, the Polaris comes into its own when the cargo bay on the Vulture gets full, and you'd otherwise have to be heading home. So this part of the process for me would be unchanged. It's still loading up everything onto the actual Vulture itself, which involves a little bit of Tetris with the multi-tool. I do appreciate that the multi-tool seems to have reverted to its previous default left-click, right-click behaviour since previous patches, which is much more intuitive for me, so I'm very grateful for that. So I have 12 SCUs here of RMC. I usually stop the hopper just before 13, so the Vulture hopper at the moment carries 13 SCUs, and I don't want to waste a single ounce of that delicious RMC goodness. So I usually stop the salvage process just before it gets to 13 so I can unload 12 crates and have nearly one ready to go in the hopper. And neatly enough, doing it this way, the very first load you get fits very neatly on the Vulture cargo grid for 12 SCU. So I know here, this is my final box because this is the one that fills the cargo grid. So it's back up to continue some salvage. And this is still one of my favourite gameplay loops at the moment. When I first started playing Star Citizen, I was all about the ship combat and doing all of that stuff. And, you know, I think that still has a place. I'm certainly not averse to fighting my way around on a ship. But actually, if I'm playing quite late on an evening, if I'm pretty worn out, there's something about salvage that's very relaxing. It feels like it's happening at my own pace. I don't have to respond to things as quickly. I'm much more in control. And when I'm tired or had a long day or something like that, salvage is just great for that. So it won't be for everyone. There'll be some people that find this quite boring, quite bland, and that's fine as well. I think ultimately Star Citizen is a game that is trying to offer gameplay loops that cater to a lot of different people with a lot of different tastes, and tastes that change over time. But for me, I do enjoy salvage. A bit of late night salvage. Yeah, can't go wrong. So once again, hopper's full, heading back down, unloading some of those crates, moving things around, making some space in the hopper for some additional salvage. And then, after looking around, trying to find the last of any salvage panels, I'm going to head back to the ship. So you can see here just how easy it is to spot that Polaris, even if you didn't have the little text saying this is the Polaris. It's so easy to scan and identify on the scanners that if you're parked within a few kilometers, you're unlikely to lose it. So back to the Polaris, and then it's going to be a case of getting on board the hangar bay. Of course, there's no up in space, so we've landed underneath the ship. Come back around on top. And then all aboard. Nice, careful, neat approach towards that hangar bay. And we'll park in forwards this time around, I think. A little bit of a delicate operation. But there we are, down. So, next case is going to be managing the boxes. Of course, the cargo bay below here is full of boxes, so just check that everything is looking good. And then we'll have to leave via the ladder on the side of the Vulture. Depending on how many panels you've salvaged, you may or may not have actually filled the non-grid cargo on the Vulture. So if it was a smaller group of panels, it might be things are just on the cargo grid. But in this case, we found so many panels that really we've filled up the Vulture quite significantly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring one of the cargo lifts up from down below and just start moving boxes and crates around. The Polaris has these two cargo elevators which lead directly from the hangar bay to the cargo bay. What I tend to do is leave one of those up and one of those down, and what that does is it creates this on the elevator that's down, it creates this hole at the side of the cargo bay, at the side of the hangar bay, which leads directly down to the hangar bay. And anyone who has used a reclaimer will recognize this kind of hole where you can just fling boxes down and then go and sort them out later. Obviously this is Star Citizen, this is not perfect. You do run the risk of complicating some of the physics calculations, and you do therefore run the risk of losing one or two of these boxes. But ultimately, you're probably not dealing with huge numbers of boxes here. A completely chock-a-block full Vulture is probably fewer than 40, so the chances of you losing things when you're dealing with smaller numbers tends to reduce, I think. And we've obviously got this huge cargo space here in this cargo bay to be able to organise them. And if you wanted to do it properly, I'm sure you could move them to the elevator and ride the elevator up and down and do it that way. But for me, this seems to work. So all of that cargo is now moved to the cargo grid of the Polaris. It would have been quite easy to head back out and search for some more crates, but the servers here have been struggling a little bit. I was playing this session during the IAE launch event, so rather than tempt fate, I've got a full load of RMC here to sell up. I thought I'd get back to safety and do that before something went wrong. There we have a nice view of the Polaris across ArcCorp heading to Area 18. And I love this kind of first-person view coming through the clouds. For somebody that's played Star Citizen for a number of years, the fact that we're at this point where you're flying a heavy ship down to the spaceport, you can relatively easily find the spaceport, which makes a nice change, but going through the clouds and seeing all of that, it looks very, very cool. So here's a little external shot there of the Polaris coming in to Area 18. Love it. So at this point, kick it into the SCM mode and cruise in towards the spaceport. Ask for a landing bay. They've given one, and wow, It's actually the one that's right in front of me. That very rarely happens. They usually send me all the way over to the other side, so that's a very handy one to be given. And then feeling a little bit like my landing might be judged here, but hey, I'm just a regular player heading down towards the hangar, lining the ship up as best I can, keeping an eye on those doors, making sure that they're opened enough, and then bringing the nose forward. So I tend to do these landings a little bit nose down. You can see I'm 20 degrees nose down here. That's just to improve visibility. And as I start to get into the hangar, you'll see that I pull the nose up for a level descent. It's all a game of visibility. Landing complete. So there we have it. One Polaris plus Vulture plus some RMC landed back down at ArcCorp. For those worried about leaving it there, fear not. I used the onboard tractor beam to get everything moved off the grid so that I could sell up. The server was completely ignoring all the RMC I had on the grid, so I had to do it that way. If you enjoyed this video, you might press the like button to let me know I should make more similar videos, and if you're not yet subscribed, given that you got this far, you might like to do that too, so that YouTube will show you more videos like this in future. But otherwise, and as always, thank you for watching.